Good afternoon, everybody. Imogen just very kindly introduced who I am and what I do. I have two of my staff people here, Ben Carrick and Sylvia Pedesek, who Ben is my kind of partner in crime in designing conferences and events and workshops and things. And if we had a half hour more, we would have done something like that would have blown your mind, but we don't have that much time. So we're only going to just sort of excite you a little bit in this panel. This is how this session is going to work. For the next 10 minutes, each of my esteemed panelists are going to introduce themselves and just say, at first, who they are, what they do, how long they've been doing that. And then we're going to do a second round where I am going to refresh their memory from a conversation we had a couple days ago or even longer ago, to have them tell you in a sort of a brief TED-ish like way, so you can sit or you can stand, whatever you like, something that they are working on or have been working on that defines regenerative agriculture, that can help create a definition of what regenerative agriculture is and what it means, and to share with you a success and potentially, if they have one, a roadblock. And then what we're going to do, starting at about 2:25, is we're going to discuss together a case study that Ben and I have created for this session. So we're going to hand that out to you at about 2:20, and then I'm going to facilitate a conversation amongst the panelists about how they would approach this particular opportunity or challenge. And that is the way we are going to get all of you to ask questions. So the kinds of questions that I'm interested in hearing from you, or the kinds of statements I'm interested in hearing from you, are: what is your interest in regenerative agriculture? How have you been engaging? How have you been learning about it? What inspires you about it? And when you see the case study, which is around a product that everybody knows called tomatoes, it is designed to prompt you to come up with more questions, so that when you leave this room, what my goal is for when you leave this room is that you have a little bit more information about what regenerative agriculture is, how investments are working in that space, and you have your list of questions of what you need to know next in order to take your own interest to the next level, whether it be the investments that you're currently doing to the next level, or you're just day one thinking about regenerative agriculture and the next piece of your journey on that. So how does that sound? Great. Okay. So I'm just going to go in order here and ask Caroline to introduce herself to you.
All right, great. Caroline MacGill here. I am a managing director at Armonia, which is a family investment office based in Greenwich, Connecticut. And our mission is to live in harmony with nature. We focus on regenerative agriculture, and I've been with the team a little over 5 years.
My name is Marc Oshima. I'm one of the co-founders and chief marketing officer for Aero Farms. We're an indoor vertical farming company based with global headquarters in Newark, New Jersey. And I'll talk a little bit more about what we do. My background, though, has been in marketing, specifically in both consumer packaged goods as well as retail, and specifically within the supermarket industry. I've headed the marketing for the Food Emporium, for Sada Markets, specialty gourmet food, restaurants. So the idea of, one thing in farming is one thing to be able to grow it, the other thing is how to sell it. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that perspective is for Aero Farms.
Great. And I just want to remind everybody, we are recording this session, so bring the mic close to you when you speak and speak clearly.
Use my big voice. Hi, I am Sada Geuss. I'm an investment manager at Trillium Asset Management. Trillium is a sustainably focused, values-aligned investor, and we've been doing that exclusively for our clients since our founding in 1982. So that's clearly been an evolving space for us, and we've I think, kept up with that, and are continuing to try to innovate and think of new ways that we can develop investment opportunities for our clients that are reflective of their values. Sustainable agriculture broadly has been a part of that since the beginning, and I work with our clients on looking at opportunities for that in both public markets as well as in private equity and debt, real assets, and other portions of their asset allocation.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Steffen Schneider. and it's a pleasure to be in the space with folks who are really interested in the topic that I've devoted my whole life and career to. I am a farmer at Hawthorne Valley Farm, 2.5 hours north of here, and I'm also Senior Director of the Institute for Mindful Agriculture at the farm. And so my whole life has been devoted to practicing biodynamic regenerative agriculture. And the question that I carry now, and I think we'll talk about here, is how do you scale that in the appropriate way? Because clearly the earth and all of us need it. So very happy to be here.
Thank you.
Here, here. Hello, my name is Aria McLauchlan. I'm the co-founder of a newly formed organization called Landcorps USA. We're spearheading an initiative to create a new national standard and a new USDA marketing label for regenerative soil health practices for farmers here in the U.S. So I appreciate the tailor-made conversation about what it means to define regenerative beyond a conceptual idea into something that we can really take action on and scale from a movement to an industry.
Great. Terrific. So I think I would like to invite each of you one at a time up here to do your thing, if that's okay. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now everybody's going to come up and just do 5 to 7 minutes of something they're working on. Hopefully they'll incorporate their own or their organization's definition of regenerative agriculture, and through the I hope what you realize that I've done here is have two different investor perspectives, 2 different farming perspectives, and a marketing perspective. And the reason I've put this particular group of people together, or these particular links in the chain, is because it needs all of this, and it needs all of these kinds of people working together and understanding things at exactly the same time in order to move a good idea, such as what each of them are going to talk to you about, into a viable program, whether it be a business or an investment or a policy initiative, et cetera. So with that, Caroline.
Thank you, Karen. It is a privilege to be here and to talk about the theme that we care the most about at Armonia too, which is that of regenerative agriculture. And I think maybe I'll start from a perspective of how we look at regenerative agriculture and then how we look at investing, and hopefully provide an example of something that you can all walk away with and maybe think about doing on your own with your own organizations if you're investors or otherwise. So when we look at the root cause of the environmental and social crises that we are experiencing as a society, food happens to be a touch point and an epicenter for those crises. And as a firm whose mission is to live in harmony with nature and to deploy capital to enable us as a civilization to live in harmony with nature, we're tasked with looking at holistic solutions to major challenges and developing investment strategies to help build the new system that we can look towards. Regenerative agriculture, in our mind, is ground zero for the change that we hope to see across the world. Regenerative is not a word that rolls off the tongue. It's a hard concept to market and grab. But what it means is if sustainability is here and it's about the status quo, regenerative is about investing to make things better off. So when you look at agriculture, you can say the measurable metrics: soil health, water retention, plant biodiversity, animal biodiversity, all the way up through the human health implications of what's happening with the better and healthier food that's being grown regeneratively, are the litmus tests or the outcomes that we hold ourselves accountable to. We invest on an integrated capital basis, meaning that we have multiple tools in our toolkit because we are a family investment office, and we invest for the long term in patient capital. So we can invest in private equity, we can invest in land, we can do philanthropy, and our goal is to create holistic solutions to challenges, so bring all of those tools together to create collaborative, change-making groups of individuals and organizations that push the ball forward. So our focus within regenerative agriculture is grass-fed beef and dairy. Cattle on our grasslands are potentially the most, right now, one of the most degenerative systems that we have, and they have the possibility of being the most regenerative. Cattle are $100 billion on the beef side industry in the U.S. Dairy side, I think it's $40 billion. If we move the world towards a grass-fed and regeneratively managed grass-fed future, we can start chipping away at what is ultimately a regenerative soil health future. I can go into the detail, but I won't. And people have probably seen Cowspiracy, but the theory is if you move cattle on the land differently, you can improve soil health, water retention, and bring back living systems. And it's about the way that you manage your landscapes. So we have invested in a portfolio of now it's going to be 200,000 acres of land across the United States where we're diligently monitoring what is happening and the changes that we're seeing across the land because we're using livestock differently. That was a process we started about 10 years ago. As we have gotten comfortable with the thesis that, yes, these are radical changes, we started investigating the industrial food system and saying, well, what's happening to these cattle when they're leaving the farm gate? They're going into this industrial system that 4 companies own 85% of, and they're all going to feedlot, and we're growing Roundup grain across all of our native prairies to then feed to animals. And why not just finish animals on the grass? Remove grain, we say, insert brain. So we've started investing in 5 years ago, started investing in companies that were developing alternative models to work outside the feedlot system, fresh beef, hot dogs, local meat subscription businesses, trying to develop proofs of concept of a fleet of entrepreneurs who can prove a better model. We work with other investors. We collaborate across other companies. As we started to develop these amazing entrepreneurs, different businesses that are making change, we realized they all have stuff in common, and we don't want to see all these horses just win the race. We want to see all the alternative beef companies out there flourish. We don't want to see like one monopoly, so we started doing philanthropy in the space. We're helping seed a trade organization that's going to bring all the grass-fed folks together. We work with a number of family investment offices. We call ourselves the herd. We want to kind of trample through the system, disrupt it, and create a regenerative future. And I think our biggest hope and both the challenge and the opportunity for us has been collaboration. So what we want to do is not be existing in a bubble. We want to be working together with others, other investors, other nonprofits, you name it. We work with almost every nonprofit in the space that deals with this area. Some of them have turfs and what have you, and it's not about turfs. We've got large problems. We need to work together. The biggest obstacle is figuring out how to step away from your own personal interests, and we experience it every day on an intimate level and come across our same own challenges, but how you step away from those and really work for the whole. And we probably just don't have enough time to get there. But when we think about how, when we were asked to speak to a women's conference today by, thankfully, Karen, we kind of think about this as a more feminine way of investing. It's more nurturing, it's long-term oriented, it's collaborative. We share our understandings, solutions, and our call to action is to work together. So thanks a lot.
Great, perfect. She did amazing, right? Literally right on the bell. I forgot to do something, which is to take a poll of all of you in the room, just so our group here understands who's here. So I'm going to try to get the segments right, and maybe, Drianne, you can help me a little bit. People who work for family offices, philanthropists, fund managers, foundations, philanthropy, other asset owners. And so a whole bunch of you didn't raise your hands. Just 3 people who didn't raise your hands, tell us what you do. Lawyer, okay. Fundraiser, great. Research, okay. Does anybody else want to say what they do before we go on?
Advisor's a good one.
Advisors, yeah, okay. All right, great. Marc, you're up.
All right. I'm not sure how the poll's going to help me, though. But always happy to share, what we're doing. So as I mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders for Aero Farms. So we talk about regenerative agriculture. We talk about what are the major pain points we think about that are facing traditional field farmers today. That's what really drives us in thinking about a new paradigm. So at Aero Farms, we're able to grow indoors in warehouses without sun or soil. We're completely changing the equation. And we just built out our 9th farm in Newark, New Jersey. It's the world's largest indoor vertical farm. So when we talk about how do we do this, so Aero and Aero Farms refers to aeroponics. So we're misting the roots with nutrients. It's a very targeted way. It's a form of hydroponics, but it allows us to grow with 95% less water than you would out in the field. Also allows us to grow with 40% less fertilizer, and by growing in this controlled environment, we use 0 pesticides. So we think about how do we change this equation of inputs and outputs. And the water, this is our most precious resource. So 70% of fresh water is going to agriculture. 70% of the pollution is coming from agriculture. So we think about the use of all those fertilizers, the pesticides, the challenges that you have with that in terms of runoff zones and imbalances. So how do we change that equation? The issue around arable land, right? We've lost 1/3 of our arable land in the last 40 years. So again, how do we think about how do we bypass those challenges and issues? Here in the U.S., it's very much about centralized production, so coming from Central California. Think about all the food miles. A lot of focus on today on food waste. A lot of people think about the number 40% is thrown out in terms of how much food is actually thrown out at the back end. But if you take it back all the way through the value chain, through that complex supply chain from the retailer through the distributor, then to the farm, it's actually over 76%, is being lost in that equation. So we think about all those embedded inputs and energy. So this is really what drives us at Aero Farms to think about a different way of farming. And this is really at the heart when we think about, again, how do we enable local production? How do we do it at scale? How do we think about food safety as well as a real critical component? And we think about this idea of how to be good stewards. So we think about, again, the idea that as a company, we've been mission-driven organization from day one. We're part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation Circular Economy 100. The idea fundamentally is how do you eliminate waste and turn it into something productive? So we're able to do things in terms of, again, less water, but even our growing medium. So I mentioned we don't grow in soil. Our growing medium is cloth, and it's a reusable medium. It's actually made out of 100% recycled water bottles that we're taking out of the waste stream, and we're turning it into something green and productive, and it's reusable. So these are things that we're looking at each part of the equation in terms of how do we have it impact, how do we change that equation. We'll address it. There's a lot of question in terms of we use a lot of energy because of we don't use sunlight, we use LED light. And the idea is that we're very targeted though with the right kind of spectrum of light to optimize for the plants. We focus on things like alternative energy. We put in our own natural gas turbines. We focus on environments where we can do and utilize renewable energy as well. So we're constantly thinking about the entire value chain, about how we think about how we can have a better impact. This whole idea though around certification, just by way of hands, has anyone been following what the National Organic Standards Board has recently announced? Anyone? A few people. Well, they came up with a point of view, a recommendation to the USDA, their advisory board, that anything that's grown with hydroponics or aeroponics was under debate about whether or not it could be considered to be organic. The basic premise, and a lot of what we talk about regenerative, is like the vitality, the health of the soil. Very contested. Actually, they changed their position from 2010. It was 8-7 in terms of the vote that they allowed hydroponics to be considered now to be organic. And the idea is, again, changing, I think some of the mindset around tools. And it'll be interesting to hear Steffen's opinion and thoughts around that. But it's really more important about, I think, how do we think about ultimately how to be good stewards. So as a company, for example, we think about whether or not we're organic or not is really not the most driving factor for us. We think about what's next. And with this idea of the whole regenerative standard that people are talking about is that fact is you now need to think about the externalities, the inputs, and that's much more encompassing than just organic alone. And so as a company, and it was great to meet someone from B Lab here today, we're a certified B Corporation. So the idea that this is going beyond the world of agriculture, right? This is going beyond in terms of other verticals and thinking about, again, as a business, how do we measure up against other industries and other companies so that we know that we can be a force for good and how we can be a good actor in terms of the entire industry. So that's how we've looked at some of these things related to how we grow, how we think about our precious resources, and then how we think about certifications, and then transparency. So the Certified B Corporation is very much about not only the environmental, but also societal impact we're having, but it's a scorecard. It's a transparent scorecard that we think that's what, at the end of the day, is what the consumer's looking for. Great.
You have one more minute.
Oh,
if
one
there's
more?
anything else you'd like to say?
Sure. So,
Or you could trade your time,
no. So, again, it was just trying to, and there's questions. We'll have questions too. But so, a little bit more about what we're trying to do in terms of we think the pain points here in the U.S. are acute, but the impact, we very much have this lens on international. We're very involved with the B20, helping inform the G20. We're very involved with the World Economic Forum. And this idea, though, is that, again, when we think about areas, we have projects in development in the GCC, we have projects in development in China, and we have projects in development in Northern Europe. These are major pain points around the world, and so these are things that need to be confronted. We need to have scalable solutions. Again, that's something that was mentioned. And this idea, again, how do we have real big impact is really thinking about, again, how do you think about this equation? We'll be the first to tell you that this is not easy to do. We've been one of the pioneers. We've been doing this since 2004. Our approach has been a little bit different when we talk about really appreciating these inputs. So we have the expertise in-house, the horticulture, the crop physiologists, the plant physiologists. We also have the engineers, we have nutritionists, microbiologists, and the idea is we're thinking holistically about it.
Great.
All right?
Thank you.
All right.
Yes. Take a couple of questions. Sada.
I feel like as we go down the line, we might have extra time to just talk specific about our things, because I think we are building on the same conversation about what we think is regenerative agriculture. I'll maybe broaden it out a little bit from our perspective, and we think about it, as sustainable agriculture and what that investment means across a few different pillars. The production is clearly a big input, and I think the one that we're thinking about today. But we really do believe, as others have said, that this is a really critical issue from so many different environmental and social considerations. Revitalizing rural America and globally rural communities is obviously at the core of that. So we think about it around social equity as well when we're thinking about investing in agriculture. At Trillium Asset Management, as I said, we've been doing this for 35 years, and we look at our role in the investment community as being an investor and clearly a leader in that space, and also as an educator. And to your point, we don't want a couple people to win in impact and social investing. We really want a big tent and a lot of players and a lot of participants. And part of that is fostering education. It's fostering networks. It's really building coalitions around these issues. We co-authored a paper this year with some other institutions and think tanks and Croatan Institute. So if you were at the rural presentation this morning with Josh around sustainable food and agriculture and how you can invest through that lens throughout your portfolio. I think it's easy to look at a space, and I think any space really, and see really easy opportunities in a specific asset class for reflecting that value. What we're trying to help with this paper is to broaden that and think about where you can have incremental impact in every single asset class that you're investing in. So as an example, at Trillium, we're focused primarily in the construction of portfolios of public equities and fixed income. When we think about agriculture and the opportunities there, I will be perfectly honest that isn't the highest impact space, right? When we go through kind of the opportunity set, we know it's in real asset investment, we know it's in private debt, and it's in private equity. But there's still opportunities to be had in the public markets. So we think we have the tools that have to be utilized to do that. So in the public space, we're being an advocate in all of the work that we're doing. We use our position as a shareholder to advocate for positive change in the companies we're investing in. So clearly in public markets, you're probably going to have more focus on the consumption portion of the equation, right? You can be an advocate at large food and beverage companies, asking them to improve their practices around water, around pesticide use, around buying and promoting organic products. And so we've done a lot with Smuckers on coffee as Folgers as part of their unit, working with also in our investment decisions, right? So we have the advocacy piece, and we've done a lot on food. We've done a lot on labor in aquaculture and agriculture internationally. We've also, in the investments we're making, a lot of this business should be private and should stay in the communities, but those verticals and getting distribution and getting scalability is going to involve public companies. So there is some investment opportunity there when you look at companies like United Natural Foods that's doing distribution, looking at used to be Whole Foods stood on their own, now they're part of Amazon, but Sprout, companies like these, there are investments there. So outside of that, we're also working on collaboration, network building. We really take our position in the space as one of leadership, so we're looking to support organizations that are doing work in small-scale agricultural investment in communities. So Slow Money is a group that we've sponsored and are actively involved with. Carrot Project, others that are in the space. Then finally, we understand, because our clients push us on a daily basis to push ourselves, that just being in the public markets is not going to amplify their impact, and that we have many other asset classes to look at. And so we are partnering with organizations that are skilled in looking at this stuff all of the time, and leverage their talents and their expertise to make investments for our clients in other asset classes. So we're looking at investments in venture, in real assets, in private equity. We're looking at market rate investments, but we're also looking at investments where people are getting concessionary returns. We aren't a family office. We are an investment manager, asset manager, so we aren't doing as much on the philanthropic side, but we can invest in opportunities that have, again, concessionary returns and perhaps have other dollars. That's blended capital, that we're not the philanthropic dollars, we're not the grant dollars, but that is a component of the investment. So I would say a couple of areas where we've had some real success in the community development financial institutions. I know it's been brought up earlier at this conference, but the CDFIs are an amazing place to have really big and direct impact. We can work with organizations that are in rural communities. We've worked with Coastal Enterprises in Maine, who has a specific program around sustainable agriculture, understanding that agri and aquaculture is a huge business for long-term sustainability and job growth in Maine. We've also worked recently with Iroquois Valley Farms, which is on the real asset side. They are a real estate investment trust currently, and they do financing for land acquisition. So they're taking, I'll be really quick. So they're either purchasing organic land, but primarily they're buying traditional land and working with farmers that have been selected, identified to go with this property on transitioning that land to organic. And the specific investment is their soil restoration notes that we have been working on. They came out of a grant that they got for conservation innovation. And the grant allowed them, with this note, to do a 3-year loan for farmers that are moving land to organic, get them through that Death Valley, get them through that period where they go from traditional to certification and are getting those premiums for organic by giving them lowered lease terms, reduced rents on the land, and also technical assistance. So that's a place where our clients are able to get some investment return, but also be really having direct impact for organic farmers. Thanks. Sorry, because I took more than I thought.
No, it's fine. It's fine. You guys, you're all doing so well. I think you have been practicing consistently since we spoke on Monday afternoon. I just want to say one thing, that when we talked on Monday afternoon and I heard about the soil restoration notes, it was very exciting to me, and I hope that Sada and I have some time to talk later this afternoon, because we've just completed a phase of a multiple stage innovation and economic development strategy in the Mid-South Delta, which is 12 million acres of farmland across 98 counties across 5 states. And 75% of what's grown there is in 4 crops: soy, corn, rice, and cotton. And they are headed to an economic train wreck down there because of global grain prices, et cetera, et cetera. And we quantified this valley of death. We have a great chart about it. And what we and they are looking for right now in that region is something like that. So it's worth a conversation for us to have later. But I just wanted to tie it in. What she just was speaking about ties into to research that's going on in different agriculture regions around the country. That's the one we're working on. It's big. It's going to take years to kind of push this region through. But I just came back from a resilient agriculture convening there, which was Tuesday and yesterday, and we did an exercise similar to what you guys are going to be doing in a minute. So anyway, Steffen, I'm so glad Steffen was able to make it. He was traveling, so we couldn't find you for a couple weeks.
Thank you.
Yes, but we're glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm very glad I'm here myself. So hello. Whoops, it's not right. Yes. So I'll tell you a little story, and then I'll give you an example of how I see the future unfolding around agriculture. So I've been farming since 1983. Since 1989 at Hawthorne Valley, trying to farm biodynamically, which I think is another word for regenerative agriculture. And so Hawthorne Valley is a very diverse farm. We milk cows, we have pigs, we grow grains, we grow vegetables, we grow food for the cows. So it's a self-sustaining system. And then we have a vertically integrated food value chain. We make dairy products, we bake bread, and we make lacto-fermented vegetables. And then we sell them at markets and a store at the farm and distribute them. And so where are we today? So it's a very interesting world we live in. So Karen just referred to it. Exactly 2 weeks ago, I sat on a plane coming back from India, where I'd spent 2 weeks visiting biodynamic farms and also participating at the Organic World Congress that's put on by the International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements, IFOAM, every 3 years, which was held in Delhi this year. So that was, as you can imagine, quite an amazing, mind-blowing experience, and I'll come back to that later. Then this morning, I'm walking through a dairy barn with 60 cows. I look at 2 litters of pigs that are 2 days old, and now I find myself in the heart of Manhattan. So it is an interesting world we live in. I think it's a world that's amazingly diverse, that has stunning polarities, and I think, though, is more and more aware how interdependent and interconnected we all are. Everybody that lives on this one planet. I think that's an awareness that I feel is growing tremendously today. And so what does that lead me to think? Well, what it leads me to think is, and I think that's the work that I think many of us here are involved in, maybe all of us, and certainly Hawthorne Valley and the Institute for Mindful Agriculture is trying to work with, and that is that we do believe agriculture and food is an essential lever to change a lot of these challenges that we are facing and provides a tremendous amount of opportunities. But it has to be an evolving story and practice of agriculture. And so how does that look like? So here's my view of that. I think, and it's interesting that I'm here with Marc on that same panel, because I'm going to mention the word now that he's able to work without, which I think is very interesting and I think is part of the future. I think the future is going to be very diverse too. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. But the way I see the future unfolding, at least from my point of view, is we need to understand and coordinate an integrated effort in 3 realms at the same time. And I'll describe all 3 realms with the word soil. So one is soils. We're all aware of that, the importance of building healthy, resilient soils. The other one I call inner soils. I do not think we will get to where we need to get without also recognizing that in each one of us, there's something akin to soil. There's an area, soil and soul. I think it's not a coincidence. That is a very closely related word. I think there's something in us that we have to learn to cultivate and recognize and work with one another to build capacity, like trust our intuition, build empathy, build real listening skills. So there's the inner soil. And then the third area is, I call that the social soil. In any collaboration, in any economic enterprise, anybody, in a relationship, my wife and I, in any place where there's more than 2 people, there's something that develops between those individuals, and I call that a social soil. And I think one hurdle that we, at least in my life, have stumbled over many times is that in social contexts, there can be a very hindering, destructive area. So really, to really collaborate truly and generate and create a generative environment, I think requires us to understand that there is something akin to a social soil, a social field. And there again, we have tools and practices that can cultivate that. So I believe the future needs to be, we need to find ways to make progress on all these 3 areas, and it has to happen in harmony with one another. I don't think we can just do one without doing the other. They're all very much connected. I think to look at them as soil is not necessarily completely crazy, although you might think I'm crazy. Nevertheless, so that's what I think needs to happen. And I think we need to partner with folks like here in this room, and it needs to be a combination of loan money, investment partners, patient investment partners, and philanthropy. I don't see how we can get this done without all these 3 working together, particularly if you keep in mind that what's also part of the reality is a tremendous issue around food access and food justice that we're facing. So that is something we should not ever neglect. And sadly, I've been struggling with that my whole career. Right now, our products go into a very privileged market. And we can hardly not do that because I wouldn't be able to survive as an economic business if I don't do that. But can't be the whole answer. And so the example I said before, how do we scale this? So Hawthorne Valley is 900 acres. It's a $10 million business, but it's obviously not big enough. So how do we scale it? So we had the good fortune to spin off as an LLC our sauerkraut business. And I'm very happy to say that Armonia was actually a lead partner in that effort. So we've spun the business off. We've partnered with investors. There was some philanthropy involved, and we're now scaling that part of our business because it's a very rapidly expanding marketplace. And we're hoping that the profits of that business eventually will make the investors happy, but will also support some of the research and education activities that are necessary to move this whole paradigm forward. And in the context, and I'm going to finish, the context I all see that in is we need to develop, and I think the example will point to that, how do you develop regional food sheds as a basis of changing over the food system. And I think processing centers can be extremely important structuring nodes in that new food system. And they can even be eventually maybe be vertically integrated holding companies where we would need help from many of you folks. So that's kind of the big picture. And I think Whitethorn for me is an extremely exciting example because when I see producers and processors and philanthropists and loan officers and capital investment folks sitting around one table, that I think creates a generative field that I think has tremendous potential. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And now to switch completely to another lens of looking into this world of regenerative agriculture.
Thank you, Karen. Hi, everyone. My name's, for those of you who joined a little later, my name's Aria McLauchlan. I'm the co-founder of a newly formed organization called Landcorp USA, and we are proposing a new national standard and a new marketing label for regenerative soil health practices. And there's the opportunity, as I said just a moment ago, to think about how this expands from an exciting movement and an amazing idea to something that really is an established industry where there are clear pathways for investment. I do want to bring in a few key points to bring home some of what's been said and to help, I think, explain why we're positioning the definition in the way that we are. And those are some sobering statistics. We're losing so much topsoil each year that due to erosion that we have about 60 years of agriculture left in the country, which is 60 years. That's according to the UN. We've been in a close conversation with the head of the Agriculture Research Service at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And in the U.S., it ranges from 30 to 100 years, but 100 isn't much better, and it really is an incredible rate. Additionally, agriculture in its conventional industrial form contributes up to a third of all greenhouse gases. And we're losing a lot of it. It comes in a couple of different forms, but it includes the carbon that is lost from the soil. And then breathe. The good news is that the regenerative practices that we're all talking about here today can reverse those trends. And that's a really hopeful and an inspiring point of view to understand. We're finally starting to see agriculture established on the global climate stage and others as both problem and solution. So the interesting piece about that is once you have that information, what do you do? As a consumer, as an individual, there's not right now a clear way to take action, or how do you know which products have been produced regeneratively? For companies, how do you incorporate those practices into your supply chains? For investors, there's not necessarily a clear pathway right now, and particularly for our farmers, there hasn't been a clear economic incentive to make those very real changes to their businesses. So it's all well and good to say, could you save the world for us? But without providing a clear pathway and an economic incentive for that, it can be a little challenging. So we are proposing a label as a way to create a premium for farmers in the marketplace and to create that national standard, as well as a clear verification process for how we know if that's been achieved and if there is a consistent standard. We're doing that in the label that we're proposing, and the label itself is not a new idea, but we're proposing using the USDA organic label and creating an organic plus regenerative label for current organic farmers, and then also creating a USDA regen label, and that would apply to conventional farmers. And that's an important piece of the definition, because while we do need a standard that has integrity, that has clear practices plus outcomes, we do think that it needs to apply to more than just organic. And to give you a sense of the scale, organic is about 1% of American farmland. So it's a pretty small percentage. So if you think about the impact that we could have if we apply regenerative to the 99% of farmland in the U.S., right now, the organic industry in the U.S. is valued at $47 billion and growing. And again, if you think about that applied to all of agriculture, bringing in our consumers, bringing in farmers who are not necessarily aligned with climate or organic as their main goals, but who serve to benefit from this, we start to really see the potential. And that definitely, that definition is tethered to soil as the common ground and the key to reversing some of those trends that we mentioned earlier. Just quickly on the supply and demand piece, the way we see that demand could be generated is particularly through companies, as I mentioned, incorporating and achieving internal sustainability goals and targets. Companies are starting to identify agriculture as either a problem or a solution. Right now you have companies like Walmart with their Field to Market program. So companies are building these programs in silos. Each company is having to do their own effort. And a lot of times you'll see some kind of success or marketing story related to those sustainability practices, but it's oftentimes being shouldered, the cost and burden being passed on to the farmer. So having a national standard and something that companies don't have to create from scratch is something that we think is important. And then the other idea I wanted to share with you is the idea of commodity crops. As Karen mentioned, the sheer scale of acreage that's devoted to commodity crops in the U.S. is absolutely humongous. But right now, for farmers, they're mostly anonymous in the marketplace. So the way that the sustainable palm oil industry addressed this was with a book and claim system. And that is a way to create a marketplace where farmers can get certified, list their yield on a marketplace. Brands can pay farmers for that premium without actually having to build the physical infrastructure out. And that's a way that we see to build out that demand in the market, even though some of those physical pieces of infrastructure aren't in place yet.
Great.
So
Well
pause there.
done. Well done. So we're just going to move. Yes. We're going to move right along into our case study. I'm going to ask Ben on my team to read you this because you'll know why I've asked him to read you this, because he reads things beautifully.
Karen just asked me to do this, so I haven't had a chance to rehearse my lines, I'm afraid. So, regenerative agriculture investment R&D. Regenerative agriculture is a system of farming principles and practices that increases biodiversity, enriches soils, improves watersheds, and enhances ecosystem services. Regenerative agriculture aims to capture carbon in soil and above-ground biomass, reversing current global trends of atmospheric accumulation. At the same time, it offers increased yields, resilience to climate instability, and higher health and vitality for farming and ranching communities. The system draws from decades of scientific and applied research by the global communities of organic farming, agroecology, holistic management, and agroforestry. So the sort of case scenario we're setting up starts with this little tidbit of data. Over 95% of the nation's processed tomatoes and 1/3 of the global crop are produced in California, a state with dwindling water resources. So here's the issue. Climate change and dwindling water resources will necessitate a different approach to growing tomatoes in the U.S. With plentiful water supply in other areas of the country, including agriculture regions that are desperate for innovation, why not think of shifting production from California to other places in the U.S.? Idea. The Mid-South Delta is that 98-county region Karen mentioned earlier, 12 million acres of agriculture spanning the Mississippi River across 5 states. Always a commodity-producing region, think cotton, soy, corn, and rice. Times are changing, and the region needs a boost. Global grain prices have fallen and are anticipated to stay low. Currently, product is shipped out of the region before processing. Potential value to the region is lost. And yet, Memphis, the country's most well-developed and efficient logistics distribution hub, it's where FedEx is headquartered, is the commercial center of the region. And Memphis is the country's 10th most important food and beverage manufacturing city. The region boasts fertile soil, water, and warm, increasingly warm, temperatures. Thus, what would it look like to diversify agriculture production in the Mid-South and develop the region as a tomato-producing one? Here's the opportunity. Rebuild soils while introducing tomatoes and other new crops for new markets by considering many methods, including integrative livestock and produce systems. Leverage strong seed breeding capacity for products that are climate future durable. Leverage interest in urban agriculture for both education and food production reasons, think Kimball Musk, and year-round production. Leverage ag tech community and investment that exists in Memphis. Integrate a new collective action approach to community development centered around food that is working to build demand and supply for fresh, healthy food, practically from scratch and with substantial resources. Is it an investment opportunity? From the perspectives of a family office's commitment to regenerative agriculture and food products, to a biodynamic farm that's getting into food production, and from branding and certification, soilless agriculture, and more traditional investment guidance perspectives, we will explore.
Great. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah.
You did that well, right?
Thank you.
All right. So now we of course, towards the ends of these sessions, we're always running out of time, but I hope that all of you will stay here a few extra minutes so that we can have at least 10 or 15 minutes of dialogue around this issue. So the way I'd like to work this is to have people on the panel respond to this idea and share with everybody, like, what would I need to ask? What would I need to explore? What would I need to know whether this was something we would even consider? And we can go in any order whatsoever, and feel free to raise your hands. We'll just get as much of this done as we possibly can. Who wants to go first? Of course.
All right, I'll start. Very interesting case study, Karen. So the thinking that comes to my mind is, for one, like I said before, I do believe part of the future is regionalizing our food growing into food sheds. So I think one part of that is we have to think less in one crop commodity type ways of looking at it, but more in families of products. So growing tomatoes is a great idea in that area, but clearly if you want to respect regenerative agriculture principles, in order to build soil health, you need crop diversity, crop rotation, probably integration of livestock. So it will mean tomatoes will be part of a new system that will be hopefully taken hold in that area. And for me, it's a very interesting distinction to even in our thinking, commodities really have become in our world more like a currency and almost not food anymore. So food is one thing, commodities is another thing, and everything we have to reinvent what food needs and how it can be grown in this diverse rotations.
Indeed, and in that region, those 4 crops, with the exception of rice, are commodities. The soy and the corn is not human food; it's animal food or fuel. So so agriculture in that region is completely separate from eating and from food, if you think about it that way. So very good point.
I might just add to that and say, I think with change, there is the issue of cultural change and how that is perceived by neighbors, community.
Continue.
Fear not. Essentially taking into account culture change, and I think that there are opportunities for grains could still be grown, but they could be grown in different ways. Right now, a lot of our grains are annual crops, so that means that they're harvested every year. It disrupts the soil a lot because you're continuously harvesting and then replanting, and so there's the opportunity for perennial grains. Like, for example, in California, there's a grain called Kernza wheat, which has these long roots, which are kind of incredible, and so that there are...
He's taking up our time.
Perennials for consideration.
Yes, perennials for consideration. So I will admit that I racked my brain a bit to think of a case here that would include the perspectives of all the people on our panel here. Marc. Because tomatoes and other things can also be grown indoors. And seriously, Kimball Musk has a presence in Memphis and is planning to bring a version of container farms to Memphis and start putting them in all sorts of neighborhoods.
Yeah, I think, to your point, at retail today, the majority of tomatoes sold are hydroponically grown, all greenhouse. So you see a whole industry shift, and it's because it's addressing these fundamental needs in terms of the challenges of growing outdoors and having that consistent supply and having the quality that's needed. So it's clearly been adopted in one part of the equation. Things that come to mind when you talk about this area, and you talked about the warming, increasingly warming, and we talk about how to be in concert. So that increasingly warm concept, the thing that comes to mind is, in the crops that were mentioned as well, is the heavy use of pesticides that have been used in that area. And we think about the challenges that we've had with the whole Mississippi Basin, and then the dead zones that's in the Gulf, Sea today, that's as big as the state of Connecticut, right?
And dicamba this year.
Right. So that's so how do you address those realities, though, in terms of from a production standpoint? And I think that's one of the things that we can think about the crop rotations, and we can think about I think some of the other aspects of how to be good stewards of the soil and regenerative from that standpoint. But the fact is, with the climate change, they're introducing more pest pressure than ever before, and so how do you address that? So I still see that those are some opportunities of why we think growing indoors, controlled environment offers some advantages.
Mm-hmm. Great.
To build off of Steffen's point, I would want to know where tomatoes fell into the stack of regenerative products that you could use to remediate the landscapes of the Mid-South Delta. Mm-hmm. So where do they fit in? What are all the other types of products? And then where do we position the Mid-South Delta regionally with their own consumption needs versus exporting to the national market?
Yep.
And how can we invest to rebuild the local food infrastructure, and what, if anything, is needed for that cash crop or kind of local branding to bring them to the attention. And if it's not tomatoes, it's a group, and you probably need a better name than Mid-South Delta to start attracting people
We have
to
been
want,
told that
want that
before.
produce.
Yes. And if anybody has any ideas about that, I'm going to look at the branding person at the end of the table. Great. Sada, how about you? What does this idea make you think about?
I think you certainly I guess I'll give an investor perspective and also perhaps a little bit of a personal perspective of someone who grew up in an agricultural community. When you think about retooling and changing kind of broadly an industry and their focus, I do think that there's clearly a need for market rate investment, but that's perhaps a little further down the chain. You're going to have near-term needs of transitioning these farmers to a new system, new equipment, new approach to farming. They have sunk costs, right? Farmers just have incredible inputs, and so there's the transition period is something that has to be addressed. I think looking at local partnerships, a first stage investing, thinking about community development organizations, thinking about organizations that have had boots on the ground, not coming in, bringing new ideas in, but also being thoughtful, as you said, about kind of current culture in the transition. It is work to get 65-year-old farmers or 70-year-old farmers like my father-in-law to change their thinking around kind of what is the way to farm. So I think a lot of technical support, and then obviously the verticals distribution, being near a hub, being near FedEx's hub is an incredible resource for that area. So you're less concerned maybe about the distribution, but that's a key piece. So I think there's all sorts of investment opportunities from direct support to the farmers to processing. That's always an area that's interesting and an opportunity there. But I say that as a cautious investor that a lot of pieces have to come to the table to make it work.
Indeed. So let's take a couple questions. Hi, yeah, say who you are, where you're from.
I guess I would just want us to be thinking about California I mean,
Right.
there's been comments about the cultural impacts in this Mid-South Delta thing, but what are the implications for the dislocation in California as well?
For sure. Yes, sir.
Steve, Reynolds Foundation. First, what is the cost of this tomato going to be? Are they going to be
Let's work backwards, right? From
Well, in other words, if they increase the cost or keep it out of the mouths of poorer people, if you will, a larger percent, that's a negative that has to be considered, I think. Workers, I am sure that working in a greenhouse versus a field, not that field jobs are good, but there is a disproportional impact on that. Taste, of course, the fruit that we hate to.
Thank you for bringing that up. As a food
will there
person,
be
that
a-
matters.
And the whole, again, transportation issues.
So what would be the first question you would ask if somebody brought this fantasy idea to you?
Given my social justice concern, is this going to be available to people, or is it going to be a nice thing that we do for the environment, which is very important,
Right.
but take something out of it?
Right. As the final product, you mean? Yeah. Okay, great. Yes, hi.
Hi. So I want to add to the California point. I wouldn't give up so quickly on California. Sorry. Thank you. I have a friend who, for the last 30 years, has run an organic farm, 130 acres over the Monterey Bay, and they produce the most gorgeous, delicious tomatoes without irrigation. So what I was going to say is that water is actually, ways to work more judiciously with water is another thing that has to be considered. Not
For
just
sure.
go to the places that are
Absolutely.
having water.
It's one of those both and situations. Yes, hi.
Hi, I'm Marcia Nelson. I'm with Alberline Family Office. And we actually, we've been connecting over email. We're actually working in we do a lot of project finance. We've done a lot of renewable energy. We're working on a waste to animal feed deal. And so we like things where we can actually build something. So on this case study, I would say, well, okay, what are the implications? Could we partner with a Heinz Corporation or something? Can we build a manufacturing plant that supports, so it's not always just, what are you taking that you can ship, but what can you do? Like, what
Adding
what can we
value
do?
in the region.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And then on a personal, I grew up in Utah. My husband grew up on a sheep ranch in southern Utah. So like your comment about the farmers, I'm trying to imagine my father-in-law, trying to do something other, like, I know sheep. Sheep are stupid, but I know what they do. And so, but like kind of retraining that farmer mentality, because a lot of the dinner table conversations was, don't let the BLM, if you know the Bureau of Land Management, it was like they are like BLM is a 4-letter word to farmers. So I think, it's great here. I live in New York, and it's great that we talk about all these things. But I think that cultural integration, and how do we bring people who have been, my father's family, my husband's family has been ranching for 150 years. So how do we get them? We have to get them. They're stakeholders. So my other question is, how do we get them on board? And part of it is like maybe showing them how they can make a profit, maybe put a plant on their farm. Those are some of the things that I would consider.
Right. Great. Anybody else?
I'm Lisa Sebesta with Fresh Source Capital, and we also make investments in sustainable agriculture businesses.
Yep.
But the question I had was, thinking about what investments, particularly in infrastructure, would have to be made to really get this business off, or this system or opportunity off the ground, and what do the returns to each one of those investments look like? Because I think when you really start to think about that, that will really dictate what type of capital is the best fit for each of those investments.
I'm curious about how the labeling proposition you're putting forward differs or builds on what the organic standard has become, because I know there's been a lot of controversy around that. So I'm just wondering, what lessons have been learned that you're able to take from that to promote with this new standard, and how different is it?
Absolutely. Well, do you want me to... I'll try to keep it brief because it is a little different from this project. But essentially, we are looking at using the organic the brand from that label. So the awareness, the fact that it's in 83% of American households, not just on the coast, but around the country, and has that ubiquity and trust and understanding of some positive of meaning to something that currently doesn't mean much of anything to anyone, being regenerative and soil health and so on. So that association is really important. We are, in terms of the program and the infrastructure, we're primarily using what already exists from the NRCS. So it's an agency called the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which has practices and outcomes that are very specific to soil health, and that would be layered on top of the organic brand. We're really looking at something that is not redundant for farmers, that doesn't add cost, so it wouldn't be a separate or ancillary program.
There is a coffee break right after this session, so you can go into detail with each other about that. We are out of time, but I just would like my 5 wonderful people here, who I wish we had another hour or 2, because we could have built many layers of this on, all the layers of soil. One word of advice each of you have for people in the room who are thinking in this way, which is why they're here.
I would say start with visiting a regenerative farm and get the look, feel, and understanding of what that means on the ground.
Great. Marc?
One of the things we didn't get a chance to really talk a lot about, but is around food safety. And so with the Food Safety Modernization Act, more than ever before, it's going to be really important that everybody has an opportunity to be able to apply and be part of the standards and rigors there. And today, there's a clause that certain farmers under a certain size of production are exempt. And that's a question on whether or not that's right from the consumer standpoint and their safety.
I would say, think about issues like regenerative agriculture and other values that you're looking to reflect in your portfolios in a holistic way, and really look at it through asset classes. Don't get too caught up on the perfect idea, which I think has come up several times. Don't let perfect get in the way of good, and really think about these things as something that you can touch on as an investor in every aspect of how you're investing your portfolios.
Great, thank you. Steffen.
Yes, you're all very welcome to visit Hawthorne Valley, by the way. So it's an open invitation, anybody who's interested.
It's a very beautiful place to visit.
And I would say, I think the challenge for me at least is how can I get out of what I call, or what a mentor of mine calls, an ecosystem mindset to an ecosystem mindset. I think that's the challenge. Look at the whole.
Great, thank you.
I would say act now, and just like in nature, our strength is in our diversity, and we do need a diversity of strategies to address this moving forward in the speed that's needed.
Great. And I'll just end by saying, go with patience and never let go of the idea that this is going to be a long view and a long haul that needs to happen in a short amount of time. So don't skirt around the cultural issues. I mean, a lot of what we do is get in there with farmers and understand what would it take for them to consider things differently, and try to be objective in every conversation you have. I want to thank everybody, because you were a great audience and a great panel. And maybe we'll be back next year to do part 2.